Greetings there, everyone, and welcome to Wake Up Wednesday. Yeah, you better wake up because it's 12:30 in the afternoon right now. So grab that cup of coffee, take a big sip, as I just did, and wake up. And also take a big sip because it's cold. I'm here in the barn right now because outside it's very windy. The temperature's in the high teens, but the real field temperature, the wind chill, has it at 5 degrees right now. So I'm going to stay put in here where it's nice and warm. And I kind of get the feeling that our epistle lesson that we have for this coming Sunday from 1 Corinthians, the second chapter, is kind of a wake-up call. A lot of what Paul has to say throughout his letters is a wake-up call for us all. Now, remember that there's at least 4 letters that we're aware of that Paul wrote to the Corinthian church. And you might say, hey, wait a minute, I only have 1st and 2nd Corinthians in my Bible. Yeah, we all do. We don't have those other 2 letters, and there may have been more. Well, how do we know there's at least 4? Because the 2 letters we do have mention other letters that we don't have, okay? So we have that going on for us. But Paul, he did a lot of writing, so he could have communicated with them many times. But his letters to the Corinthian church, he's really trying to get them back on track. They're kind of messed up. And in 1 Corinthians, especially, there's this divisiveness within the congregation that's going on. They're either following specific leaders, even Paul himself, saying, hey, I'm on Paul's side, not you guys' side. No. That's a messy thing, Paul says. That's not true. You can't chop me up. You can't chop Christ up. No, you're all one in Christ. Have the same mind amongst yourselves. But then he moves into a lot of the things that are happening in the church where whether they're moral difficulties or the way they're doing things. So we'll get into some of that as we look at 1 Corinthians, the letter to that church. But here we are, beginning of the 2nd chapter, and now he's starting to get into the meat of the letter and the theological emphasis that he has that undergirds everything that he's going to say in his letter. When I came to you, this is how it starts in chapter 2, brothers and sisters, I did not come proclaiming the mystery of God to you in lofty words or wisdom. See, that's the way they would do it in the Greek culture. All this flowery rhetoric and just craziness. Although I do have to say, sometimes I have trouble understanding the Apostle Paul because I think he falls into that category just a smidgen, but that's just me. But he goes on, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. Now, I owe a lot personally to a professor down in Columbia, South Carolina, Mary Hinkle Shore. She had a wonderful picture of what this means for the Apostle Paul and how we can interpret everything that the Apostle Paul is talking about, or virtually everything he talks about in his letters. I've decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. Okay, she said it's like going to the optometrist and, you need a new pair of glasses. So they say, okay, how about this lens? How about this lens? And they start flipping through and you're going squinting. And no matter what you do, you can't see straight. And then all of a sudden, bam, there's that one set of lenses that land over your eyes and it's perfect. You see everything beautifully. That's what Paul is saying. You have to look at your new life in Christ through this lens. And that lens that I offer to you is Jesus Christ crucified. That's what I use, he says. It's the one we all need to use. So no matter what it is, what issue you're dealing with, what situation you find yourself in, you need to look at it through this lens, Jesus Christ crucified. Now, I also discovered that what's interesting in this is Paul, there's a specific verb tense that he uses when he says Jesus Christ and him crucified. And that it's kind of a nerdy Greek thing. It's not the aorist tense in the Greek, which means, yeah, he was killed on a cross, but hey, he's not there anymore, so this is what's happening. No, it's the perfect tense in the Greek. And the perfect tense is a little bit different. Oh, yeah, it happened, but you know what? It's still happening. Jesus is crucified, and that has meaning for us right now. It's as if you can look up and see him on the cross. So view all of life through Jesus on the cross. Why would we want to do that? Wouldn't we want to move on to resurrection? Oh yeah, he goes on to talk about resurrection and how important that is. But we have to first view it through this specific lens, because that shows the power of God. That shows the so-called foolishness of God, because the rest of the world will look at that and say, man, if God was so good and great and powerful, he wouldn't allow himself to be killed on a cross. But he did. Why? Because Jesus emptied himself. We'll have that beautiful poem in his letter to the Philippians that he quotes from. He emptied himself on that cross. He emptied out his love upon us. It's a love that gives and gives and gives till there's nothing more to give. Well, there is. There's always lots more to give. And he just keeps on giving. It's like the Energizer Bunny, right? Just keeps on going. Well, that's kind of, forget that. But it is true. Jesus' love never ends. It just goes on and on and on. But it only happens because he has chosen to empty himself on the cross for you and for me. So that's what's so big and important about this. And now he goes through a whole bunch of stuff here, and you can read it in chapter 2. When you get to the end of chapter 2, he says, "For who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him?" Well, none of us. But he goes on to say this, but guess what? We have the mind of Christ. Because of what Jesus has done for us, and because his Spirit lives in us, we have that mind of Christ. We can see the world through a new lens, which is Jesus crucified. And that lens is one of love. And it's one of not bragging about yourself, that you're so much better than others, and we can fall into that temptation. He kind of gets into that in the first letter to the Corinthians, how you can become so ultra religious that you start bragging about it and you put others down because of their religion. You can't do that. You can't do that. How is that inviting anyone into the love of Christ? It's not. It's not at all. So keep all of that in mind as you continue to read through 1 Corinthians. Now, the truth of the matter is we're not going to get done with 1 Corinthians before we move into the Pentecost season. Well, Easter, Lent and Easter and then Pentecost. We're just not going to finish it off. But so as we finish up here in Epiphany season, read on. So I think we have maybe 2 more Sundays yet of 1 Corinthians, but read the rest of the book and you'll see the trouble the people were in, the divisiveness within that congregation. And you would say to yourself, how did they ever survive? Well, they survived for one reason. The love of Jesus infiltrated their lives and helped them get through all those rough times. And it can always help you and me and our congregations to survive any rough times as well, as we view one another through that lens of Christ crucified, Jesus on the cross for you and me. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take one more sip of this hot coffee. Oh, that was almost too big of a sip there. God's blessings be with you. Stay warm and enjoy this first day of February. And by the way, it's Groundhog Day Eve. See you later.